She walked through the front door, still wearing the conference weekend on her face. That's the only way I can describe it. Not tired from the drive, not road-worn or crumpled the way people look after 3 days in hotel conference rooms. Glowing. Settled into herself in a way I hadn't seen in years. New clothes I didn't recognize. Hair done. That particular kind of calm a person carries when something has gone exactly the way they wanted it to. I should have been glad she'd had a good trip. I wasn't. My name is Nathan Hargrove. I'm 48 years old, and for the past 15 years I've been building a chain of fast food franchise locations across 3 states. Started with a single unit off the interstate in 2009, a burger place with leaky pipes and a walk-in freezer that ran warm. By the time my wife Dahlia came through that front door with her conference glow, I had 27 locations. I built that from nothing. Every lease negotiation, every equipment breakdown at 2 in the morning, every hiring crisis and health inspection and regional manager who quit without notice. I was there for all of it. What I wasn't there for was everything else. Dahlia and I had 4 kids. Marcus, 17, Jenna, 15, Tyler, 12, and our youngest, Ava, who'd just turned 9. At least that's what I believed. That's the number I carried in my head when I thought about what I was working for. The thing about building a business from scratch is that it becomes the architecture of your daily life. 60-hour weeks stop feeling like sacrifice and start feeling like routine. You tell yourself your wife understands because she says she does. You tell yourself the fact that she's stopped complaining about your travel schedule means she's found her rhythm. You don't ask too many questions about the rhythm. That would be rude. Dahlia had built her own world around the school district. PTA boards, fundraising committees, curriculum nights, parent advocacy groups. She handled all of it. Every teacher conference, every school play, every field trip permission slip. I was grateful. I told myself regularly how grateful I was. She was holding down the home front, my pareja. I could build the future. That's how I framed it to myself, and it's the kind of framing that keeps a man from looking too closely at anything. But there were things I noticed and chose to file away without examining. The wardrobe shift, for one. She'd always been put together, but somewhere in the last few years she'd started dressing for school meetings the way other women dress for actual events. Designer labels, expensive perfume, full makeup for a Tuesday afternoon in a gymnasium. When I'd mention it, she'd say she wanted to make a good impression on the other parents. I accepted that. It was an answer that didn't require me to do anything with it. Then there were the conferences, educational summits for parent volunteers, regional advocacy workshops, 3-day intensives in nearby cities. She talked about them with genuine enthusiasm. New literacy programs, student mental health initiatives, collaborative frameworks. I thought it was wonderful that she'd found something that energized her. I was proud of her for it. I even told people about it. My wife is really involved with education advocacy. It became part of how I described our life when other people asked about Dahlia. My father, Raymond, tried to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. He's 72, still sharp, the kind of man who spent 50 years watching people and never lost the habit. We were on his back porch last summer, 2 beers in, when he set his bottle down and looked at me with that particular expression he reserved for moments he considered important. "Nathan," he said. He only used my full name when he meant it. "Are you paying attention to what's happening in your own house?" I told him everything was fine, that Dahlia had just gotten involved in the school community, that modern marriages didn't look the way his generation expected them to look. He picked his beer back up and looked at the yard for a long moment. When a woman starts changing how she presents herself and where she spends her time, and her husband isn't part of either of those things, there's usually a reason for that. I told him he was being old-fashioned. Now I understand that he wasn't being old-fashioned. He was being protective, and I understand now why his old friend Walter Grimes had been canceling their weekly card games for months, making excuses about family obligations. My father had probably put it together long before I had the information to do the same. The kids seemed fine. Marcus was finishing his junior year, talking about college applications, already carrying himself with that particular seriousness of a teenager who's figured out that the future is real. Jenna was deep into the drama program, always rehearsing something. Tyler and Ava were exactly what 12 and 9 look like. Homework arguments and negotiations over screen time and the general productive chaos of a house where children are still becoming themselves. Normal. Our life looked completely normal. Normal was the cover story. The weekend Delia went to the Regional Education Excellence Summit in Columbus should have shaken something loose in me. She'd been anticipating it for weeks. 3-day intensive, she said. Networking with education professionals from across the region. Big opportunity. Friday morning, she was up before the alarm, moving through the house with an energy that didn't match what she was supposedly going to. Her suitcase was organized with a care that struck me even then. New outfits arranged carefully, things I'd never seen her wear. When I mentioned the clothes, she laughed and said she wanted to make a strong, professional impression. She kissed me goodbye and drove off. Sunday evening, she came back exactly the way she'd just come back again 3 weeks later, from the Indianapolis conference, floating through the door, luminous in a way that didn't correspond to 3 days of conference room presentations. She talked about education theory and student advocacy frameworks with the fluency of someone who had prepared talking points in advance. Vague enthusiasm. Polished answers to questions I hadn't asked. That night she was different in a way I noticed and told myself was good. She was affectionate, present. I lay in the dark afterward, telling myself the conference had reinvigorated something in her, reconnected her to the life we'd built. By morning, I almost believed it. 3 weeks after Columbus, I made a decision I'd been avoiding. The feeling in my gut hadn't gone away. My father's words kept surfacing when I was trying to focus on other things. Mi pareja, I called a man named Brent Calloway, an investigator a business associate had used during a partnership dispute, private, discreet, experienced in domestic cases. I felt embarrassed making the call. I told him that when we met. Most men who call me already know, Calloway said, sliding a contract across the table of a diner 40 minutes from my office. They just need the file. I hired him on a Thursday. The following Tuesday, Calloway called me from a number I didn't recognize, and what he said in the next 4 minutes took everything I thought I knew about my life and turned it inside out. Your wife has been meeting with 2 separate men on a regular basis, he said. The first is a teacher at your daughter's school. Name's Aaron Croft. The second is an older man. Name is Walter Grimes. Walter, my father's card partner. The man who had been at every birthday party, every family barbecue, every 4th of July cookout for 2 decades. The man my kids called Uncle Walt. Are you certain about Walter? I asked. Hotel security footage places them together last month. Same weekend your wife told you she was at the conference in Fort Wayne. I sat with that for several seconds. It wasn't just Delia lying to me. It was a man I had trusted my entire adult life. Someone my father considered his closest friend. Someone who had looked me in the eye across the dinner table hundreds of times while holding something I didn't know he was holding. Calloway kept going. The teacher, Aaron Croft, had been in the picture for roughly 8 months. Coffee that turned into afternoons at his apartment. Delia had been there multiple times during school hours. Aaron Croft taught at Jenna's high school. He had been her English teacher the previous year. I had sat across from him at a parent-teacher conference and thanked him for the attention he'd given to her writing. I asked how long each situation had been going on. Calloway said the Croft situation was recent, 8 months, maybe a bit more. Walter Grimes went back further, possibly years. I told him I needed documentation that would stand up in a divorce proceeding. What happened next changed everything, because possibly years turned out to be the most important phrase in the conversation, and I didn't fully understand why until I was sitting in my office holding a lab report that reordered the past 17 years of my life. I ordered DNA testing kits through a discreet service and collected samples during ordinary moments no one would think twice about. Marcus's water glass, Jenna's hairbrush, Tyler's toothbrush, Ava's juice box. I was their legal father. The testing was legal. I told myself it was just confirmation. I told myself I was being thorough. I was trying not to think about what thorough might confirm. The results arrived on a Tuesday morning. I read the report once, then again, then a third time, because the third time I was still hoping I'd misread something. Tyler and Ava were biologically mine. Marcus and Jenna were not. No genetic relationship detected. Marcus, who was 17, who I had driven to every baseball tryout and helped study for every chemistry exam, and who looked, when I thought about it now, when I let myself really look, like Walter Grimes around the eyes and jaw, in a way I had never allowed myself to see. Jenna, whose talent for language and storytelling I had always attributed to some dormant gene on Delia's side. The timeline arranged itself in my head without my permission. Marcus had been born 18 years ago, right around the period when Walter's marriage was falling apart and he started spending more time at our house. Jenna's birth corresponded with Delia's growing involvement with the school community, with the period when she'd started developing close professional relationships with teachers. That evening, after Tyler and Ava were in bed and Marcus and Jenna were upstairs, I sat Delia down in the living room and put the DNA report on the coffee table between us. I didn't speak, I just waited for her to read it. The glow left her face like someone had cut the power to it. The confident, settled woman who had come through the front door, glowing from Columbus and Indianapolis, disappeared and was replaced by something I hadn't seen before. Raw panic. "Nathan, I can explain." "No more," I said. "I know about Walter. I know about Aaron Croft. I have hotel receipts and surveillance photographs and a DNA report that says 2 of our children aren't mine. There is nothing to explain. There are only decisions to make now. The question is whether you tell Marcus and Jenna the truth, or whether I do." She didn't try to argue. She understood, I think, that this time there was no version of the conversation she could reshape to her advantage. For the first time in our marriage, I had the full picture. She started crying. Not quietly, the desperate kind, the kind that comes from a person who's run out of exits. "Please don't destroy what we've built," she said. "What we built," I said, standing up and looking down at the woman I'd been married to for nearly 2 decades, "was built on a story you invented. The foundation was always yours. I was just the one paying for the house on top of it. Remember that in the description and in the pinned comment you'll find all our supplements, from fitness to health in every sense of the word." The next morning I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, a woman named Carol Baines, who had handled 2 of my franchise acquisitions and who I knew was not the kind of person who softened things unnecessarily. The second was to my father, not to tell him everything, not yet, but enough of a warning that what was coming wouldn't reach him cold. The third was to Walter Grimes. I called him at 7 in the morning and told him to meet me at a place called Harlan's, a diner on the edge of town where neither of us had any particular history. "Sure, Nathan," Walter said, his voice easy, unsuspecting. "What's this about?" "You'll know when you get there." Harlan's was quiet at that hour. Walter came in looking relaxed, the easy confidence of a man who had no reason yet to feel otherwise. When he saw my face, he slowed down. When he sat across from me in the booth and I put one of Calloway's surveillance photographs on the table between us, Walter and Delia walking into a hotel lobby together, his face went through several stages in a matter of seconds. 17 years, I said. "How long have you been doing this?" He looked at the photograph. He didn't reach for it. He just looked at it. "Nathan, Marcus looks like you," I said. "I can see it now. I couldn't before because I wasn't looking. DNA doesn't lie." He flinched. His hands, resting on the table, went very still. "It wasn't supposed to become what it became," he said finally. "And yet here we are." I leaned forward slightly. "Did you think about my father when you were with her? Did you think about what you were doing to a man who has considered you his closest friend for 50 years? Walter couldn't hold my eyes. "Harold doesn't have to know all of this," he said quietly. "My father already knew something was wrong. He tried to warn me and I didn't listen. He deserves the truth more than either of us deserves to keep him comfortable." I stood up. "You have 48 hours to tell him yourself. After that, I will." I left him with the photograph and didn't look back. That afternoon, I drove to Jenna's high school and asked the front office to arrange a meeting with Aaron Croft. The principal was present, which made the conversation awkward in ways I didn't particularly care about. When Aaron walked into the conference room and saw my expression, whatever he'd prepared to say died before he opened his mouth. "Mr. Hargrove," he started. "Is this about Jenna's? It's about you and my wife," I said. His face went red. He tried the misunderstanding angle. I put a DNA report on the table. 15 years ago, you had an affair with a married woman, I said. That woman's daughter is your biological child. For the past year, you've been teaching her while attending parent conferences with the man she believed was her father. Whether you knew or didn't know, you need to understand what that looks like from where I'm standing. I waited for that to settle. You can resign quietly, or this information becomes part of a very public divorce proceeding. Your choice. I left him in the conference room to think about it. By Monday morning, the high school needed a new English teacher. That evening, I brought all 4 kids into the living room. Delia sat beside me. Her eyes were swollen. She knew what was coming and understood that there was no longer any version of this conversation she could soften or redirect. Marcus, 17 and perceptive, read the room the moment he sat down. "Are you getting divorced?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "But there's more than that." I looked at each of them. Tyler and Ava on the couch together, too young to fully understand what was happening but old enough to feel the weight of it. Jenna sitting rigid, watching my face. Marcus with his arms crossed, braced. "Your mother has been in relationships with other men for a long time," I said. "I found out recently. What I also found out is something that affects Marcus and Jenna specifically." The room went very quiet. "Marcus, your biological father is Walter Grimes." His expression didn't change for a full second. Then something behind his eyes shifted. "Jenna, your biological father is Aaron Croft, your English teacher from last year." Jenna made a sound I hadn't heard from her before. Tyler asked what biological father meant. I explained as gently as I could that it meant Marcus and Jenna had different biological origins than him and Ava, but that this didn't change anything about how I had loved them or how I would continue to love them. Delia said, "I'm mi pareja sorry. I never wanted you to find out this way." Marcus stood up. His voice, when it came out, was completely flat. "Uncle Walt has been coming to this house my whole life, playing grandfather, knowing he was my real father. He looked at his mother, and you let him. Every birthday, every Christmas, you let us call him Uncle Walt." Jenna was crying in a way that had nothing performative about it. "Mr. Croft knew he was my dad when he was grading my papers," she said. "When you had that conference with him freshman year." She looked at me. "Did he know?" "I don't think he knew about the paternity," I said. "But your mother did." The room came apart. Tyler and Ava pressed close to me on either side. Marcus walked out the front door hard enough to shake the frame. Jenna went upstairs, and the sound of her door closing was one of the loneliest sounds I've ever heard in a house I'd spent 15 years filling with people. I looked at Delia. "This is what it costs," I said. "Not me, not your reputation. Them. This is what it costs." She was crying harder than I'd seen her cry in 20 years of marriage. "How do we fix this?" she asked. "We don't. You broke something in a direction that doesn't reverse. Now everyone in this room learns to live in the new shape of things." I found Marcus on the front porch about an hour later. I sat beside him and waited. The neighborhood was quiet. Someone down the street had left a porch light on. "Am I still your son?" he asked. Not hostile, just asking. "You have been my son for 17 years, I said. "That's not a biological transaction. That's every drive to practice and every argument about curfew and every time I stayed up worried about you. Walter Grimes contributed genetics. I raised you. Those are not the same thing." He nodded. The tears came and he let them. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we figure out how to be honest with each other and move forward from there. It's going to take time. It's going to need more conversations than either of us wants to have." But you're still my kid, and I'm still your father, and that's the only part of this I'm certain about. The hardest conversation of everything that followed wasn't with Delia's attorneys or the mediator or any of the professional machinery of divorce. It was sitting across from my father at his kitchen table on a Sunday morning and watching his face when I told him about Walter. Raymond Hargrove had been friends with Walter Grimes for 50 years. They had known each other through military service, through business failures, through the deaths of people they loved. My father had buried my mother 7 years ago, and Walter had stood beside him at the graveside. That was the man. I drove out Sunday morning and found him in his garage, working on an old radio receiver he'd been restoring for months. He looked up when I came in and read my face the way he always does. "Nathan," he said. "Sit down." I put one of Calloway's photographs on the workbench in front of him. I said, "Walter has been involved with Delia for 17 years. Marcus is his biological son. The DNA test confirms it." My father picked up the photograph. He held it for a long time, studying it the way he studies things he's trying to fully understand before he responds to them. "You're certain," he said finally. "Not a question." Completely. He set the photograph down. He was quiet for what felt like several minutes. I watched him process it, not just the betrayal of his son's marriage, but 50 years of a friendship that had just been retroactively reconstructed into something he didn't recognize. "Marcus calls him Grandpa Walt," he said quietly. "I know. My grandson." He stopped, started again. "Except he's Walter's boy." "He's my boy," I said. "He's choosing to stay with me. But yes, Walter is the biology." My father stood up slowly. His jaw had that particular set it got when he'd made a decision and the decision was final. "I'm going to see him tonight," he said. "Dad, Nathan." He didn't raise his voice. "That man sat at my table. He stood at your mother's grave. He looked me in the face every week for 50 years and he was hiding this the entire time. He's going to hear from me directly." That evening, my father called. "It's done," he said. "How did it go?" "The way those conversations go." He made excuses. Said it wasn't meant to go as long as it did. Said he never meant to hurt anyone. A pause. I told him I was finished with him, that he was dead to me. If I see him again in any context, it will not go well. "How do you feel?" My father was quiet for a moment. "Like I lost 2 things today. A 50-year friendship and the version of the past I thought I was living." He paused again. "I'll be all right. But don't ask me that question for a while." The next day, Walter called me. "Nathan, I need to speak with you about Marcus," he said. "He's my son and I—" "No," I said. "He's my son. He has been my son for 17 years and he's choosing to remain my son. You had the option to be honest at any point during those 17 years and you didn't take it. You forfeited the relationship when you forfeited the truth. But biology is not parenting. If it were, this conversation would be very different. Do not contact Marcus directly. Do not contact my family. If you disregard that, the legal situation becomes very uncomfortable for you very quickly." I hung up. Walter had lost everything the deception had cost him. My father's friendship, any relationship with Marcus, whatever standing he'd had with anyone who learned the full story. That was sufficient. I didn't need to add to it. Remember that in the description and in the pinned comment you'll find all our supplements, from fitness to health in every sense of the word. Carol Baines, my attorney, was the kind of professional who didn't celebrate the cases she took on but who clearly understood their structure very well. When I laid out the full picture, Calloway's documentation, the hotel records, the timeline of the affairs, and the paternity findings, she reviewed it all with the focused attention of someone doing an assessment, not a performance. "This is as complete a file as I've seen in 20 years of domestic cases," she said, setting the last document down. 2 sustained affairs, one going back nearly 2 decades, paternity fraud on 2 of 4 children. You have leverage here that most clients in your position never get. "What can I protect?" I asked. "The business entirely, premarital asset with documented growth trajectory, real estate, retirement accounts. The adultery and the paternity fraud constitute a pattern of conduct that substantially reframes the marital contributions argument. She looked up. She's going to fight for the kids. That's where her attorney will focus. Delia had hired a lawyer almost immediately, a man named Fillmore, who presented himself as reasonable during the first mediation session and then opened by requesting shared custody and a substantial share of the business income. Carol said nothing for a moment. Then she set Calloway's documentation on the table. Fillmore looked at it. He knew what it meant. "My client has made some serious mistakes," he began. "Serial adultery across nearly 2 decades," Carol replied, "with documented paternity fraud on 2 of 4 children. Your client misrepresented the paternity of children she registered under my client's name. That's not a mistake, counselor. That's a sustained pattern of conduct with legal implications that extend well beyond marital dissatisfaction." I looked at Delia across the table. "Full custody of Tyler and Ava," I said directly. "You get supervised visitation. The business stays entirely mine. It predates the marriage and I can document every decision point. You keep the house and your car. That's the offer." "Nathan, that's not fair," I said. "Tell me which part of the last 20 years was fair." She looked at Fillmore. He looked at the documentation. He leaned over and spoke quietly in her ear. She listened. She didn't look happy about what she heard. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. I kept the business, kept the kids, and walked out of the proceedings with my finances substantially intact. Delia left with the house, her car, and a reputation in the community that bore very little resemblance to the one she'd spent 20 years building. Marcus surprised me. He had more options. He was legally an adult by the time the proceedings concluded, and he chose without much deliberation. "You're my dad," he said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table the week after everything was finalized. "You have been my whole life. I'm not going to start over with a stranger because a test says we share DNA. That's not how this works." Jenna said something similar a few days later, quieter, but the same thing. Mr. Croft was a biology fact. I was her father. We moved into a house across town, smaller than the old one. Felt more honest somehow, sized for what it actually needed to contain rather than for the version of things we'd been performing. The kids started therapy. Some weeks were harder than others, but there's a particular kind of stability that comes from living in a house where nobody is hiding anything, and the kids started to feel it before I could name it for them. What happened about 6 months after the divorce was something I hadn't anticipated. I was at a grocery store on a Thursday evening when I ran into Aaron Croft in the cereal aisle. He'd left teaching. He was working at a bookstore downtown, a real change from the professional identity he'd spent years constructing. He saw me and his expression went through everything quickly. "How is Jenna?" he asked. He kept his voice low, like he was aware of how much rode on what I said next. "She's well," I said. "She's mine and she's doing well." He nodded. "I think about her." "I understand that," I said, "and I understand why. But you don't get to act on it. You made choices. She made a choice too. She chose her father, which is me. Honor that choice by staying out of her life." He nodded again and I walked away. Some bridges aren't burned in anger. They just can't support the weight anymore. That night, Jenna asked if I'd seen him. I told her honestly that I had. "Did he ask about me?" "He did." She was quiet for a moment. "Does he feel guilty?" "I think he does." She considered that. Feeling guilty and actually showing up for someone aren't the same thing, she said. 17 years old, and she'd already figured that out. I told her she was right. 2 years after the divorce, things had settled into a rhythm I hadn't expected to feel grateful for. The business was expanding. 3 new locations brought the count to 30, and I promoted my regional coordinator to a senior operations role he'd been ready for years. The work felt different, less like an escape, and more like something I was choosing. The kids were healing in the specific, uneven way that healing actually works. Good stretches interrupted by hard moments, ground gained and occasionally re-examined. Marcus graduated and enrolled at the state university in a business program. He called every Sunday. He was starting to talk about eventually working in the company, carrying the Hargrove name into its next chapter, and the fact that this choice was his and not something I'd engineered made it worth more than I can explain. Jenna was thriving in ways that seemed to outpace the damage. She was applying to universities and had developed a specific interest in investigative journalism. She told me once that watching her father document the truth when comfortable lies were available had shaped something in how she thought about accountability. I didn't know what to say to that. I just told her I was proud of her. Tyler, at 14, had become the kind of athlete who made other parents look twice at games. Ava ran a pet-sitting operation in the neighborhood that she managed with a seriousness I found both amusing and impressive. My father passed away peacefully at 77. His last words to me, when I was sitting beside him in the hospital room, were that I had raised good children and become a man he was proud of. I have carried that with me every day since. He never reconciled with Walter Grimes. I understood why and respected it completely. Some betrayals don't leave room for the reconciliation conversation. That's not hardness. That's just accuracy. Remember that in the description and in the pinned comment you'll find all our supplements. From fitness to health in every sense of the word. I remarried 2 years after the divorce. Her name is Patricia, and she's a veterinarian who had been through her own version of this, a marriage that ended when the lies finally outweighed the structure holding them up. She came into our family with a warmth that didn't feel like performance and a patience that didn't feel like strategy. The kids found their own ways to let her in. I didn't rush any of it. Delia remarried eventually, a businessman from another state. The kids have limited contact with her. Jenna and Marcus see her occasionally, on terms they set for themselves. Tyler and Ava are cordial when circumstances require it and don't seek it beyond that. She made her choices. They get to make theirs. Walter died alone 2 years after my father. I heard about it through a secondary connection, the way you hear about people who have been removed from your life. Marcus went to the service. I didn't. I wasn't angry anymore by then. I was just finished. Marcus going was his own decision, made from a place I respected even if I didn't share it. He came home and said very little about it, and we didn't push him to say more. Some things you attend to out of a sense of completion, not out of grief. Aaron Croft stopped teaching entirely. He works in a different field now, in a different city as far as I know. He never contacted Jenna. She made her peace with that over time, in the way that people make peace with the version of a thing that actually happened rather than the version they might have wanted. 5 years out from the weekend Delia came home glowing from Columbus, I find myself in possession of a life that looks nothing like what I thought I was building and means more than anything I lost. 38 locations across 4 states now, a business my son is preparing to grow into. A daughter who's going to hold powerful people accountable for a living. 2 younger kids who are steady and curious and genuinely okay. A woman beside me who knows what I know about the cost of dishonesty and has chosen, as I have, to build something on the opposite of it. People sometimes ask what the hardest part of all of it was. I tell them it wasn't the betrayal. The betrayal is a fact. You absorb it and you move. The hardest part was that Tuesday morning, alone in my office, reading a lab report that told me 2 of the 4 children I believed were mine shared no genetic relationship with me, and then deciding, in the minutes that followed, what kind of father I was going to be anyway. I had raised Marcus for 17 years. I had been there for every version of him. The genetics were a fact I hadn't known. What I had known, what I had always known, was the kid. The kid was mine. That's the part we held on to. Not the betrayal, not the legal proceedings, not the financial maneuvering, or the confrontations, or the careful documentation of everything that had been done to me in the dark. Just that Tuesday morning, alone with a lab report and a decision about what love actually obligates a person to, I chose the kid. I would choose him again. That's not a story about revenge, though there was some of that in it. It's not a story about a marriage ending, though one did. It's a story about what you find out about yourself when the life you built turns out to have been built on something other than what you believed, and you have to decide in real time, with no warning, no rehearsal, no committee, what you're actually made of. I found out. That part 1 don't regret at all.